They came before Columbus. It's very interesting that often people ask me the question, were Africans in America before Columbus? If you read the popular literature says that Africans came over here as slaves. Because Africans came as slaves, they did not contribute anything to the Americas before the coming of the white man. But this is false. This is so false because of the fact that Africans have been in the Americas for over 100,000 years. Yes, 100,000 years. African people have been in the United States. African people have been in South America, Mexico. And yet, many people don't know about this. What I want to do in this video is I want to talk to you about the Africans who were in ancient America. I want you to see and to find out that you've been lied to about our history. You've been lied to about what Africans contributed to the Americas. Africans were the Paleo-Americans, the first people who ever came to America. The Paleo-Americans, they were Africans. They sailed here from West Africa. They formed civilizations as far as Brazil and even California. These black people, in a sense, introduced many important cultural features to the United States. You see, the black Paleo-Americans, they created, in a sense, some of the earliest Stone Age cultures here. Black people also, in a sense, came here later. In fact, black people have been coming here to the United States until the Europeans began to stop us from being able to cross the Atlantic. Their slave ships and their ships seeking gold destroyed many of the boats. But the last great expedition to the Americas was led by Emperor Mansa Abubakar of Mali. He came here in 1310. And what he did is that he left many inscriptions, much civilization here, even built many other mounds along the Mississippi River. And that's what we're going to talk about in these videos. We're going to talk about the African in ancient America. And we're going to see, did the Africans really come to America in ancient times? You're going to see that they did.
African Empires in Ancient America. African Empires in Ancient America is published by Kindle Direct Publishing. African Empires in Ancient America is written by Dr. Clyde Ahmed Winters. Dr. Winters is taught at Governors State University and St. Xavier University in Chicago. African Empires in Ancient America tells the story of the numerous African groups who colonized Mexico, North and South America. Today, most people believe that African people never voyaged outside Africa, except as slaves. This is false. The Dafuna boat discovered in Nigeria dates back to 12,000 BC, and hundreds of ancient African boats have been engraved on rocks in the Sahara Desert. This Sahara Desert, today dry and arid, was once a fertile area where people traveled and used boats as a form of communication. African empires in ancient America shows that Africans came to the Americas from the west and east coast of Africa. We know that Africans were involved in sea trade for hundreds of years because they were even mentioned in Sumerian texts. In Sumeria, they called the boats from Egypt Magan, and they called the boats from Kush, East Africa, Meluha. All of these countries, Magan, Egypt, Meluha, Kush, East Africa, are mentioned in Sumerian cuneiform. In this book, you will discover that Africans have a long tradition of sea exploration and founded many of the major American civilizations. The Sumerians, they traveled to South America and founded a rich culture that has left us the Fuente Magna Bowl and Pocatia monument. Many of these Sumerians stayed in Bolivia for hundreds of years because we know that at Tiahuanaco you can find many statues of blacks today. Although many people have heard about the possible discovery of America by Mansa Abubakari of the Mali Empire and the giant Olmec heads of Mexico, Dr. Clyde Winters gives a detailed account of the Malian colonies established by these West Africans in North America and Brazil. He also explains how many of these Malians also played an important role in the rise of mound cultures in Mexico, Brazil, and North America. You will discover the role of the She or Olmec people as the mother culture of Mexico. He outlines, in a sense, how these people contributed to the rise of many later Mexican civilizations, such as the Maya and the Aztecs. Dr. Winters also outlines the Axumite discovery of America and the role of the Ethiopians in the rise of the Mochica civilization and religion. Finally, in addition to this, the book discusses the ancient Sumerian influence in South America and the African role as mound builders in the United States. African Empires in Ancient America is the only book that finally explores the entire history of black colonization of the Americas before Columbus. It is a must-read for anyone interested in a true history of America. African Empires in Ancient America can be purchased at Amazon Kindle Direct. It can be read on any Kindle platform, iPad, and iPhone. Buy it today. Mesoamerica is the geographical name for Mexico and the countries of Central America. Today, people believe that the blacks of Mexico and the blacks of Guatemala and Honduras and Belize are the descendants of sub-Saharan African slaves taken to Mexico during the Atlantic slave trade. This is false. The Black Costa Chica and Negro Costa Chicanos, in a region where numerous artifacts have been found that indicate that black cultures thrived in western Mexico, Belize, and Guatemala almost 2,000 years before the Olmecs sailed to Mexico from Africa and landed on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. In Belize, around 2500 BC, we see evidence of agriculture. The iconography of this period depicts Africoids, and in Izapa, in 1358 BC, astronomer priests invented the first American calendar. In addition, numerous sculptures of blacks dating to the 2nd millennium BC have been found at La Venta, Chiapas, Teotihuacan, and Teotihuaco. The earliest cultures founded by blacks on the Pacific Coast region was the Mocaya tradition. The Mocaya tradition was situated on the Pacific coast of Mexico in the Saconuso region. Sedentary village life began as early as 2000 BC. By 1700 to 1500 BC, we see many Afro-Mesoamerican communities in the Mazatlan region. This is called the Barra phase, or Ocos complex. During the Barra phase, these blacks built villages and made beautiful ceramic vessels, often with 3 legs. They also made a large number of effigy vessels. The figurines of the Ocos are the most significant evidence for blacks living in Mesoamerica during this period. Here we see a female figure from Aquila, Sudan. It is clearly that of an African woman. The blacks of the Mocaya tradition were not Olmec. The civilization of Mocaya tradition began 700 years before the Olmec arrived in Mexico. Yes, 700 years before the Olmecs came from West Africa to settle on the Gulf Coast. In most history texts, the Ocos are presented as the original founders of the Mayan civilization. As you can see from the art, they do not look like Native Americans. They look like Negroes, just like other Africans. Researchers have suggested that the sub-Saharan Africans were among the first Americans. Spanish explorers found sub-Saharan African communities in Mexico when they arrived. Sub-Saharan African These statues show that the first Mexicans, the first people in Mesoamerica, were African people or Negro people.
Paleo-Americans carry African genes. The Paleo-Americans carry the African M1 haplogroup. Haplogroup M and D are the same. The mtDNA haplogroup is not unique to Mongoloid Native Americans, it is also carried by the Mande people of West Africa. Some experts claim Africans carry only mtDNA-L, so other groups in Eurasia and the Americas who carry African genes can be seen as carry non-African genes, when in reality they are carrying African genes. The nomenclature of haplogroups are changed to make it appear that the D haplogroup is nothing more than an African M haplogroup. The subclade D4 is the Asian name for the African M1 haplogroup. Dr. Fukuro et al., 2001, and Yao et al., 2002, noted that haplotypes with HVSI transitions defining 16129-16223-16278-16311-16311-16362, and 16129-16223-16249-16211-16362 have been found in Thailand and among the Han Chinese. These haplotypes belong to haplogroup M1. Haplogroup M was a common Paleo-American haplogroup. Nea, Anzac 1 Chicakaw carried the D haplogroup. This is nothing more than African M1. Other Paleo-Americans carried haplogroup M. Dr. Malhai reported the discovery of a 5,000-year-old skeletons from China Lake, British Columbia carried the M haplogroup. Malhai found that the skeletons belonged to haplogroup M, exhibiting the ALUI side gain at NP 10,397. He was unable to match the China Lake skeletons mtDNA to haplogroup C, D, or subhaplogroup M7, M8, or M9. Although these haplogroups are assigned an Asian origin, Africans also carry these M subclades including, for example, haplogroups A and M7. Some Native American present sub-Saharan African admixture. The Mande speakers carry mtDNA haplogroup A, which is common among Mexicans, namely the Miz and Mixtecs. In addition to the Mande-speaking people of West Africa, Southeast Africa Africans also carry mtDNA A. Nea of Mexico was D1 and Anzac Child was D4. Most contemporary Native Americans carry mtDNA that belongs to the M macro haplogroup, namely A and B. Fukuro et al., 2001 and Yao et al., 2002 made it clear that the D haplogroup is the name for M1 in Asia. Haplotypes with HVSI transitions defining 16129-16223-16278-16311-16362, and 16129-16223-16249-16211-16362 have been found in Thailand and among the Han Chinese according to Fukuro et al., 2001, and Yao et al., 2002, were originally thought to be members of haplogroup M1. However, on the basis of currently available FGS sequences, carriers of these markers are now labeled D4, a branch of haplogroup D. Given the transitions in haplogroup D, it is the most widespread branch of M1 in East Asia according to Fukuro et al., 2001, and Yao et al., 2002. The transitions 16129, 16189, 16249 and 16311 are known to be recurrent in various branches of haplogroup M, especially M1 and D4. Due to these transitions we can argue Paleo-Americans carrying D are carrying African haplogroup M, especially M1 in the case of haplogroup D4.
"21 points proving blacks were in ancient America before Mongoloids and Columbus." Point number 1. The first Americans, or Paleo-Americans, were blacks. This reality is based on the skeletal remains of Naia and Luzia.
Maya and Luzia were Negroes or blacks. Point number 2. Black Africans, according to researchers, have been in Brazil since 100,000 BC. Evidence that fire existed in Brazil 65,000 years ago is an indication that man was at the site 65,000 years ago. Since researchers found charcoal, which is a result of fire making, the New York Times reported that humans were in Brazil 100,000 years ago. If you would see the New York Times video, you would note that Dr. Nidra Guidan supports her dating of human population of Brazil 100,000 years ago due to finding ancient fire and tool making. Point number 3. The original Maya, beginning with the Ocos, is illustrated by their art were black Native Americans. The Mayans were originally black Native Americans. The ancestors of the original Maya were Paleo-Americans. In beliefs around 2500 BC, we see evidence of agriculture. The iconography of this period depicts Africoids, and at Izapa, in 1358 BC, astronomer priests invented the first American calendar, in addition to numerous sculptures of blacks dating to the second millennium BC. All of these blacks have been found throughout Mexico, at La Venta, Chiapas, Teotihuacan, and Teotihuaco. The earliest culture founded by blacks was on the Pacific coast. This culture was called Mocaya. The Mocaya tradition was situated on the Pacific coast in Mexico, in the Soconusco region. Sedentary village life began as early as 2000 BC. That's right. By 2000 BC, blacks in Mexico had developed a very sophisticated culture. Between 1700 and 1500 BC, we see many other African communities in Mazatlan region, and this culture was called the Bara phase, or Ocos phase. During the Bara phase, these blacks built villages and made beautiful ceramic vessels, often with 3 legs. They also made a large number of effigy vessels. The figurines of the Ocos are the most significant evidence for blacks living in the area during this period. The female figurine from Aquiles Cerdan is clearly that of an African woman. See, here's an Ocos female. The blacks of the Mocaya tradition were not Olmec. The civilization in the Mocaya tradition began 700 years before the Olmec arrived in Mexico from Africa. Here's a picture of one of the Shurla people who lived in Mexico before the Olmecs. In most history texts, the Ocos are presented as the original founders of Mayan civilization. As you can see from the art, they do not look like Native Americans. They look like Negroes, like other Africans. The Mongoloid Mexicans do not look like the Olmecs either. Point number 4. The black Native Americans lived from Chiapas to Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. Quatrefages and Rapanist wrote about these blacks. They are called the Negro Castachicanos. The Negro Castachicanos claim that they have never been slaves and are indigenous to Guerrero and Oaxaca on the Pacific coast of Mexico. The 1990 Mexican census recorded 66,000 Negro Castachicanos. These Mexicans live in African-style huts and practice rituals which may be of African origin, but most probably go back to the original blacks that lived in the area as early as 2000 BC. Most researchers believe the Negro Castachicanos are descendants of Maroons or runaway slaves. But none of the blacks of Costa Chica have songs about slavery and its hardships. The Negro Castachicanos say they are not, they insist, the descendants of African slaves. There was never slavery here, even in ancient times, and I quote. Bobby Vaughn noted that he found no consciousness of slavery among people in Costa Chica. Another researcher noted that housewives in San Jose, Estacia Grande, and Santiago Taperestla in Costa Chica say their ancestors did not come from Africa, that their families have always lived right here. And this can be supported by the statues of the Ocos, the Chieras, and other ancient black artifacts that I've shown you earlier. Point number 5. The Olmec came from West Africa. They spoke the Mandi language. The traditions of Mexican Indians make it clear that the founders of some civilization in Mexico came from the east and arrived in Mexico as a result of a shipwreck. This is interesting because Bobby Vaughn said that the Negro Costa Chicanos claimed that they arrived in Mexico as a result of shipwrecks. The stela number 5 from Izapa makes it clear that the Olmecs arrived in Mexico by boat. Here is stela number 5. The fact that stela number 5 depicts 12 roots as part of the tree of life support the Mexican tradition that the Easterners who brought civilization to Mexico came in 12 waves. And if you notice, the roots extend into the water. The Mexican traditions that support the spread of Olmec from the east coast of Mexico to the west coast make it clear that the Olmec lived in Oaxaca and Guerrero, in addition to Veracruz. The fact that the Olmec mentioned coming to America by boat may explain the Negro Costa Chicanos claim that they arrived in America as a result of a shipwreck and never were Spanish slaves. Point number 5. The Olmec spoke a Mandi language. Using the Vai language, I was able to decipher the Olmec language. As a result, we can read many of the great inscriptions that these Olmec left us. These inscriptions tell us much about the civilization of the Olmec people and their religion and culture. As a result of the Olmecs playing an important role in the rise of civilization in Mexico, we find that many Mexican languages also have Mandi languages as their roots. The Mayan and Mandi languages share vocabulary items and culture terms, as illustrated in these charts. Number 6. The Khoisan took mitochondrial DNA haplogroups mtDNA L3MN and Y haplogroup E to Eurasia and the Americas. Point number 7. There are no pure Mexican Indians. Linsky noted that between 5 and 50% of Indian genes are African genes in Mexico. He wrote this article in Indigenous Population of Mexico, Medical Anthropology, the work of Ruben Liska. As a result of the Mexicans carrying so much African blood, that's why you find many Mexicans that look like Africans or Negroes, and why many Mexicans favor the Olmecs, who were Africans. Point number 8. The Meshi, Zenu, Wayu, and other African groups carry YAP plus associated AG transition at haplotype Y, DYS271. This YAP is of African origin. Point number 9. The Indian Y haplogroups C and D show African admixture at the locus of haplotype DYS271. Point 10. The American haplogroups A and B are part of the haplogroup N micro haplogroup. The Shao and Chantel at Campeche carry RM173, E1B1B, haplogroups K and T. All of these haplogroups are of African origin. Point 11. Africans carry mtDNA A. mtDNA A is common to Mongoloid Native Americans, and Y chromosome R is common to many North American Indians. As a result, we find that many of these genes are of African origin, and in fact, you'll find that Africans in Africa carry mtDNA A. Number 12. The Spanish explorers mentioned black nations and black tribes in the Americas they met, even before African slaves were landed in America. Point number 13. The Spanish said the Aztecs were blacks. Point number 14. Paul Gaffarel noted that when Balboa reached America, he found negre veritables, or true blacks. Balboa noted, and I quote, Indian traditions of Mexico and Central America indicate that blacks were among the first occupants of that territory.
This is why so many Africans have African faces. This is why so many Mexicans have African faces. Point number 15. Vasco da Gama is said to have found information about the West Indies from Ahmed B. Majid, whom he met along the west coast of Africa, according to Bazan, in an article he wrote called Latin America, the Arabs and Islam. This was published in the Muslim World in 1967. Point number 16. Majid wrote a handbook of navigation on the Indian Ocean, Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Sea of China. Some people even claim that Majid wrote a handbook on how to travel in the waters of the West Indian Islands. Point number 17. Africans had the boats capable of sailing to the Americas. For example, Abu Bakr, the king of Mali, led thousands of Africans to settle America in 1310 AD. Point number 18. Black native Mayan people have left iconography in the sub-pyramids of Tikal, San Bartolo, and Shultun murals, which depict the creators of these monuments as Negroes or blacks, not Mongoloid Mayan. The most exciting archaeological find has to be the Shultun murals. The Shultun murals depict not only black Mayan royalty, but also Mayan commoners and elites. Here you can see some of the black architects and engineers that built the Shultun pyramids. These colorful illustrations are by Heather Hurst. The illustration of Dr. Hurst of the Shultun figure shows that black people have dressed in bright colors and wore various scarves and other hats to cover their hair and heads. Here again is the picture of the architects and engineers that built Shultun. Interestingly, the stylized reproduction of black Mexicans from Bonampak murals at Chiapas, Mexico, are also colorful. The colorful outfits of the Latin Americans that were worn at Bonampak also are worn today by Africans who live in that area today. Point number 19. Ancient Mayan skeletons carry sickle cell. Sickle cell anemia is a disease that strikes only African or black people. As a result, the fact that you find Mayan skeletons that carry the sickle cell trait, the sickle cell disease, indicates that these Mayas were Africans because only Africans or black people have sickle cell. Point 20. There are no pure Mex Indians. There's a high frequency of African mestizo admixture ranging between 20 to 40%. The admixture rate between Africans and indigenous Mexican Indians ranges between 5 to 50%. Some mestizos may hate themselves. Their light and white skin betrays their origin as the products of white, French, Spanish, and German men who exploited their black and Mongoloid grandmothers to make the mestizo raza, or mestizo race. Many mestizos declare "Viva la raza," when in reality their faces and features tell the story of exploited indigenous black and Mongoloid women who were raped to satisfy the sexual desires of their white fathers, who murdered the husbands and lovers of their poor, mistreated, and abused indigenous grandmothers. Mestizos, like their grandfathers, seek to steal the history of black Native Americans because they are ashamed that their real history is the history of the criminals and sexual deviants who made their race mestizo. That is why when they say "Viva la raza," they're celebrating the rape and exploitation of the indigenous black and Mongoloid people. To be proud of mestizo heritage while denying the history of the black indigenous Americans is just them paying homage to the evil history of their white grandfathers. Point 21. The black Africans took their writing systems with them to America. The first Africans to introduce writing to the Americas were the Olmecs. They took writing to Mexico around 1200 BC. The first researcher to recognize that the Olmec writing was Mandi was Leo Viner in African Discovery America. He recognized that the writing on the Tuxtla statuette was written in Mandi characters. Here you can see some pictures of the relationship between the various Olmec inscriptions and Mandi inscriptions in Africa. For example, the Muara Stela, the Tuxtla statuette. Many of these blacks continue to use the Vite script to write into Mayan times. The Vite script was also taken to America by the Mayan explorers led by Abubakar in 1310. They left inscriptions across the United States. Slave trade, African slaves used traditional writing systems to communicate with each other. For example, the Juka, who I believe speak a Creole language with an Akan dialect substratum. The Juka had their own writing system in Suriname, as you can see in these pictures. Herskovitz also recorded some Juka texts. Kay Howe did considerable research on the Juka script, and they were both able, in a sense, to show this beautiful script of ancient Suriname. As you can see, there are 21 points. Here I only provide 21 points showing the fact that the civilization that we call Mexican civilization was a civilization developed and founded by black people. These black people had been in the Americas for 100,000 years. These black people were here then, they were here when Columbus came, and they're here today. Viva la raza africana.
Atlantis in Mexico. Atlantis in Mexico is a new book published by Amazon's Kindle Books and CreateSpace Books. Atlantis in Mexico was written by Dr. Clyde Winters. Dr. Winters is an educator, linguist, and anthropologist. He has taught education and linguistics at Governor State University and St. Xavier University, Chicago. Atlantis in Mexico is separated into 12 chapters and one appendix. In Atlantis in Mexico, Dr. Winters tells the story of the Olmec people, who founded the mother culture of ancient Mexico. The Olmec people were descendants of people from the lost island of Atlantis, who had established a colony before Atlantis sank in the Atlantic Ocean in ancient Libya. Plato tells us in Timaeus that Libya was part of Atlantis. Plantis wrote, Atlantis controlled within the straits of Libya, up to the borders of Egypt and Europe, as far as Tyrrhenia. The fact that the Middle Africa, or Libya, the original homeland of the Olmec, was part of Atlantis, led to Greeks informing us that the Fezzan and Bilma were places where Atlantes or Atlanteans lived. In Atlantis in Mexico, we learned that the Olmec in their Libya, Atlantis homeland, had a rich heritage of boat building and astronomical navigation. It explains that the Olmec were Mandi-speaking people who formerly lived in the Sahara. Since they lived in ancient Libya, they were Neo-Atlanteans, or New Atlanteans. In Atlantis in Mexico, you are provided with the skeletal evidence that the Olmec were Africans. It details the migration traditions recorded in Mexican traditions and illustrated in Izapa Stela No. 5. Atlantis in Mexico outlines the Olmec texts and their writing and calendar systems that bequeathed the latter Mexican groups a calendar, a way to tell the seasons, a way to know the days and time. In Atlantis in Mexico, you will learn about the Olmec religion. Readers will discover the two major traditions of the Olmecs, relating to the bird and jaguar cults, and the important role children played in Olmec religious tradition. There's a chapter in Atlantis in Mexico that tells the biographies of major and important Olmec kings. As a result of recent archaeological excavations in Mexico, researchers have discovered the Cascajil Stela. This is an important Olmec text because it records the obituary of King Beppo, the name of the king represented in the Olmec head from Levanta. San Lorenzo, the Olmec head number 3. In the final chapter of Atlantis in Mexico, readers discover aspects of Olmec calendrics. In this chapter, you will learn that the Olmecs introduced the Mandi calendar used throughout West Africa into Mexico, and how it became the foundation of later calendars used in Mesoamerica by groups such as the Maya and Aztecs. Atlantis in Mexico provides the most up-to-date information you will find on the Olmecs of Mexico. It provides an account of the Olmec people, culture, and their heritage they passed on to other Mesoamerican civilizations. You can order Atlantis in Mexico from Amazon Kindle Books or Amazon CreateSpace eStore. Atlantis in Mexico is a must-read for anybody interested in ancient Mexico and the civilization founded there by the Mandi people. Axumites in early America. The Axumite people were Ethiopian people, or people who lived in East Africa. Although we know much about the Axumite Empire, very little is known about the Axumites who discovered America hundreds of years ago. In the 21st century, there are many Ethiopian communities in the Western Hemisphere. Although we believe that this is the first time that Ethiopians have been here in great numbers, it would appear that during the Arwe and Axumite empires, Semitic or Puntite-speaking Ethiopians discovered South America, explored South America, and left many ancient artifacts. There are many elements of Ethiopian civilization found in South America. Between 1300 BC and AD 600, blacks from East Africa and Asia began settling in South America. Many African skulls have been found in Ecuador, in sections of Chile, and in Valdivia, among the Punueco of Peru. Carlos Marquez in Estudios Arqueológicas y Etnográficas notes that it is good to report that long ago the Euphoramerica was also a Negro continent. Marquez insisted that the Otomis of Mexico, the Caracola of Haiti, the Aquas of Culara, the Aravos of Orinoco, the Porcillas and Matayas of Brazil, Manabis of Quito, the Chuanas of Darien, and the albinos of Panama are the remains of the former African tribes that settled, civilized, and lived in the Americas. Ecuador has provided much archaeological evidence for the presence of Africoids in South America. One of the greatest finds was a magnificent stone head of a male wearing a circular earring on his right ear. This head is similar to the carving of Akhenaten. Dr. von Woodnall had identified this figure as representing the Negroid element in pre-classical Ecuador. Jacinto Camano notes that of the skulls discovered in Ecuador, many were of blacks, especially among the Mochicas. In Punin, he noted that practically all the skulls were of Africoid and Oceanic type, and at Tiahuanaco, Peru, there are numerous carvings of blacks that have been discovered. Moreover, persistent oral traditions around Lake Titicaca recall the bearded people who were exterminated by Indians. These bearded people were Africans. According to Lanning, there was a possible movement of Negritos from Ecuador into Piura Valley, north of Chicama and Viru. He believes there is a relationship between this culture and the Valdivia site, which was active from 1800 BC to AD 100. Dr. Dixon said Valdivia was inhabited by Africoid people. There are many correlates between Ethiopia and early Ecuador and Peru. In Peru, on ceramic pots, large double-deck boats are depicted which are almost identical to the papyrus boats used in the Proto-Sahara and ancient Punt. On the lower deck of the boats are painted a number of water jars and other cargo, along with rows of people. On the upper deck, there stood the earthly representation of the sun god Ra, the same as the sun god of Meroe and Egypt, surrounded by birdmen who were handling the ropes to propel the ship through the water. The interesting thing about these pictures is that they are almost exact replicas of scenes depicted on the Egyptian pyramids. Today, boats made of bundles of reeds lashed together are found in Ethiopia, along the Peruvian coast and at Lake Titicaca, where tradition has it that bearded men were destroyed by the local Amerindians. There are other similarities between Ethiopia and Peru, Ecuador. The Ethiopians used battle clubs in war. As a result, their doctors became skilled in trepanning, or true cranial surgery, without killing the patient. This operation was unknown to Europeans until after Columbus discovered America. Yet it was known to the Peruvians. Both groups also used false beards on mummies. The ancient Peruvians manufactured bricks of sun-dried clay mixed with straw using the same formula of the Egyptians and Ethiopians. The Peruvian adobes were made in a rectangular mold, just like in Ethiopia, and Peruvians and Ethiopians used a horizontal loom staked on the ground, along with the vertical frame loom with two warp beams. Von Hagen noted that the looms used by the ancient Peruvians are identical with those of other civilizations, with which they had allegedly absolutely non-contact. A form of backstream loom was used in Egypt. A horizontal loom appears in pre-dynastic Egypt, and the one pictured on the tomb of Khenelhotep at Beni Hassan circa 1900 BC is identical with those of Andean and coastal Peruvians. The Ethiopian explorers in America who landed in Peru, Ecuador, probably reached here originally by accident. Yet, the considerable number of blacks with beards on Mexica art show there were many of these Axumites living among the Mochicas. There is a long tradition of navigation among people in East Africa. In the Sumerian records, we hear about the sailors from Meluhha taking goods to ancient Sumer and Akkad. Ancient Meluhha to the Mesopotamians was called Punt by the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians record many exciting things sold from ancient Punt. The people of Punt lived in an area stretching from the eastern desert of Egypt eastward to the Red Sea in Central Africa. These people spoke Puntite or Semitic languages. In the ancient literature of Kemet, Egypt, and Mesopotamia, Punt was recognized as a sea power. From ports along the Red Sea, the people of Punt traded with Kemet, ancient Egypt, Arabia, West Asia, and Mesopotamia. Modern Ethiopia is part of the land known to the Egyptians as the lands of the gods. The inhabitants of Punt, on the other hand, called their country Arwe. It was from here that the Semitic-speaking nations moved northward into Arabia and Mesopotamia. The Chinese and Arab records make it clear that later in history, the people who used to live in Meluhha or Punt formed a civilization called Axum. The Chinese and Arab records make it clear that the Axumites made many long voyages in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. These sailors made these voyages in mid-ocean, not coasting near the shore. Here is an East African ship carrying foreign passengers to sites along the Indian Ocean. The Axumites controlled much of Arabia, India, and parts of Southeast Asia when the Mochica Empire was in existence. We can hypothesize that a group of Ethiopian merchants, probably on voyage to China, Sri Lanka, or Malaysia, or on a military campaign to put down a rebellion in one of their Indian Ocean colonies, was captured by the equatorial countercurrent in their papyrus boats and carried to Peru, Ecuador. Merchants from Axum made long voyages in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. The Axumites probably landed in the sparsely populated area in Peru, Ecuador. In these areas, they would have met little resistance from the local Amerindian groups, who saw them probably as giants. This was due to the fact that the Axumites would have maybe been taller in height. The experience of Axumites in other parts of the Indian Ocean would have meant that when they came, they would have been very much prepared for an encounter in these areas. We can hypothesize that a group of Ethiopian merchants, probably on a voyage to China, Sri Lanka, or Malaysia, on a military campaign to put down a rebellion in one of their Indian Ocean colonies, was captured by the equatorial countercurrent in their papyrus boats and carried to Peru, Ecuador. Merchants from Axum made long voyages in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. They made long voyages mid-ocean. They didn't sail along the coast. The Axumites probably, once arriving in Ecuador, began to set out into the culture or other parts of the country away from the coast. The experience of Axumites in building underground dwellings made it possible for them to construct safe habitation complexes that they could not be exposed to any attack from any of the local people. As in Moreau, the Axumites built pyramids, and these pyramids in Peru were made of bricks and other artifacts. These Africans, they probably migrated not only from along Peru and Ecuador, they also probably made their way to Lake Titicaca. At Lake Titicaca, high in the Andes, there are numerous monoliths made in human form and reed boats. These same boats were used as far as California when the Spanish arrived. The reed boats were first introduced into Peru by the Axumites of Moche. The Mochicas seldom were without these boats. At Tiahuanaca, you can find many artifacts that relate to these Axumites. They left many and important artifacts. There is evidence that the Axumites probably introduced the battle club in war. As a result, Axumite doctors became skilled in trepanning, or true cranial surgery, without killing the patient. This operation was unknown to Europeans until after Columbus discovered America, yet it was known to the Peruvians. Both the Peruvians and the Axumites used false beards on their mummies. The ancient Peruvians manufactured bricks of sun-dried clay mixed with straw using the same formula that the Egyptians and Ethiopians did. It is interesting to note that the Peruvian adobes were made in a rectangular fashion, just as those as houses in ancient Ethiopia. In South America, an ethnic group called the Quichua speak a language which is analogous to languages spoken in the Pacific and India. The Quichua Amerindians has an oral tradition which records the entrance of the Axumites in ships made of reeds or rushes that landed from the Pacific coast off Point Santa Elena, close to Puerto Viejo, in extremely remote times. They said, and I quote, that we had a tradition from our parents. These giants from the sea were so great in stature that from the knee down they were as tall as a tall man. It was amazing to see how the hair hung from their great heads to their shoulders, yet were they beardless. They ate, probably meant they could fight, more than 50 ordinary men. Their eyes were big as plates, como picueros platos. Their arms and legs were proportionally huge. Some were clad in skins of animals, others quite naked. No women came with them. Going inland, they ravaged the country, and finding no water, these builders in great stone set to and sank an immensely deep well in the living rock, and today, in AD 1545, the water of this ancient well is so clear and cold and wholesome that it is a pleasure to drink. This well, made by the giants, was lined with masonry from top to bottom, and so well are these wells made that they will last for ages. This was a comment by one of the Spanish explorers who happened to ask the Indians. One of the major sites of these blacks was Tiahuanaca. Wilkins believes that these giants helped build Tiahuanaca. Commenting on the inhabitants of this ancient South American city, he noted that they were a reddish-skinned race, though among them, as remarkable statuary dug up from the ruins show, were also black men with prognostic features. One splendid piece of terracotta depicts in beautiful colors the high priest of the sun, with remarkably Egyptian eyes, and having on his fine, large forehead a mitra and the sign of evolution, called by the Bolivian archaeologist El Símbolo Esconado. This story, recorded by the Spanish, gives us many details of the culture of these strangers who landed in Peru, Ecuador. First, it makes it clear that these colonist conquerors were taller than American Indians. Most importantly, it details how they built great monuments out of solid rock. This architectural ability was a trademark of the Axumites. A center of Axumite civilization was the so-called Mochica civilization. On the Mexica pottery, these giants are depicted with black faces. At St. Augustine near the Colombian border, we see statues portraying these giants with African features. These Axumites probably were at the base of the Moshe Empire. The Moshe Empire extended over 220 miles along the North Peruvian coast. It lasted from AD 100 to 700 AD. They farmed irrigated fields of corn and beans and ate llamas and guinea pigs. The Moshe or Mexica built pyramids and adobe bricks. One of the people who did a lot of work at these sites was Dr. Larco Hoyle. Dr. Larco Hoyle, in his work, has left us many beautiful sculptures and pottery that depict these Africans. He found that during his research that many of the skulls of the Mexica people were of African blacks. The Mexicas were warriors, messengers, weavers, and doctors. They built roads and organized the courier system, which was later adopted by the Incas. The Axumite weavers of South America usually produced goods on a mass scale. The ajuanas used by the Mexicas came directly from Africa. Van Hagen notes that the looms used by the ancient Peruvians are identical with those of other civilizations with which they had absolutely no contact. A form of backstrap loom, for example, that was used by the Peruvians was also used in Egypt and ancient Kush. As you can see from these photographs, the Mexicas were highly skilled technicians. They made irrigation their greatest concern. In Mexica centers, we find stone-laid reservoirs supplying waters to vast areas. In addition, they built a gigantic network of canals to bring water into the Mexica settlements to fertilize large stretches of sand. The Mochi were highly skilled potters. As you can see from these pottery remains, they made beautiful pictures of their contemporaries. And as Professor Hoyle shows you, many of these photographs were of the Mexica blacks. The Mexica and Ethiopians share many cultural traits. For example, both Africans and South Americans built pyramids to house the dead. At Huanca de la Luna, which is considered to be the capital of the Moshe, there is a step pyramid that was built by the Mexicas. Here we find fine walls ornamented with frescoes which show pottery vessels and other objects with the men drawn in attitudes simulating war and defense. The Mexica society, as I said earlier, was organized militarily. There was a rigid system of labor organization. There are many scenes of Moshe pottery makers that reveal that the Moshe had the ability to create and do various interesting things, especially this brain surgery, which had to have been necessary due to the use of the war club. The religion of the Moshe is identical to the religion of the Ethiopians. For example, the Moshe worshipped a god they called Aipak, and Aipak was a two-headed serpent. The Ethiopians also worshipped a two-headed serpent, or they worshipped the serpent. The Moshe also worshipped the moon god. The Moshe called this moon god Si or Sion. This is very interesting because it appears to be a corruption of the name for the Axumite moon god, which was Sin. Moshe men made many wore turbans on their heads or caps. Many of these turbans are found in Meroitic art and also in Meroitic frescoes. It appears that the Moshe were absorbed by succeeding Amerindian groups. Much of the Moshe civilization was copied by the Shimu, who built houses out of stone, similar to buildings made in Ethiopia by the Axumites. Another interesting black civilization was Huari. Some of the Ethiopians landed and they went to the Makahasi Plateau. Here in the western Cordilleras, they began the Huari culture. The Huari were mainly African males. That explains, in a sense, why they were there. And they built a beautiful pyramid. They left frescoes that show many of their artifacts. The Huari incorporated an empire that made up most of inland Peru. In their areas of occupation, we find small forts, observation posts overlooking hills. The Huari made a very interesting monument And this monument was made out of solid rock. And now this Huari monument seems to depict the ibex, lion, elephants, frogs, and camels. And many of these things are basically found in Ethiopia. It's interesting to note that the tribes found in the vicinity of Huari monuments are called Huanca, or Huari. This Huari almost sounds the same as Harari. Harari is the name for one of the Semitic-speaking tribes of Ethiopia. And again, we notice that they built reed boats, so we can see this relationship between the Huari and the Axumites. The forefathers of Huari are only known from legend as the bearded people. The monuments show they were Africans, and the term Huari seems to sound almost the same as Harari, the name of the Ethiopian group. Berlin believes that the large ceremonial center in South America called Tiwanaku may have also been a religious center. Here we find at Tiwanaku many examples of Africans in the art. In addition to statues and pottery, the Axumites, they left a number of inscriptions throughout South America. One of the most interesting inscriptions is this inscription near the town of Paupa, some 20 kilometers northeast of Nazca. I know many of you have heard of the Nazca lines in Peru. Here we find an ancient inscription of lines that can be read in the Ge'ez language of Ethiopia. The Paupa inscription is very interesting. It is written in an Ethiopian language, and the translation is as follows. Come carve, dig down into the earth, pacify, control, and increase the waters. Make them flow forth into the region, gaining grace and favor. Go out among the people, become strong leaders. As you can see, they left this, and as you remember, they also, among the Peruvians, like to build wells. In addition to this inscription from Nazca, we also have, in a sense, several inscriptions from Ecuador. These inscriptions were found at Cuenca. And Cuenca, we find, in a sense, some sheets that were discovered by Father Carlo Crespi. And among these artifacts is one, a gold sheet with a picture of a pyramid with Ethiopian letters at the foot of the pyramid. In addition, we find a stone tablet with Ethiopian writing placed before 3 animals and a stone pyramid. These figures are very interesting. The tablets from Cuenca were written in 2 writing systems, formerly used in ancient Ethiopia. The two stone tablets were written in the Tigrinya language, while the inscriptions written on the metal sheet, which has the figure of the lion, a serpent, a pyramid, and elephant, has a series of Thermutic inscriptions. The Ethiopian writing on the Cuenca tablet is in the unvoweled form. This indicates that they date back to the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. This would correspond to the Moshe period. Here we see the Thermutic artifact. The tablet with the sun figure was probably represented Zabadan of the Ethiopian sun god, and an elephant. We find reference to these 3 things: the harp, beer, mead, and bread. These 3 things are associated in the region of Tigray in Ethiopia with a man who is about to make a journey or go to work in the fields. Reading the tablet from top to bottom and right to left, we see the following translation. Zadbaden, strong as the elephant, give me the harp, beer, mead, and bread. It's interesting to note that in Tigray, the men usually drink the beer and eat bread as they go on various trips. The Cuenca tablet, too, also has a very interesting inscription. Moving from the top of the tablet to the bottom, we read the following. In war it is the bull, Guma, that causes damage to the enemy, and the elephant that will make the outcome clear. It is the ibex, symbol of the moon god, that we must confess our sins for deliverance. The presence of these tablets in Ecuador and the depiction of sin carved out of hewn rock and mention of the god in Moshe tradition all point to the Ethiopian presence in ancient Ecuador, Peru. In summary, Africans from East Africa probably settled early settled parts of South America. These Africans of the Moshe period may have come from modern Ethiopia or Somalia, which served as a major staging area for Meroitic and Axumite navies that took trade goods to nations in the Indian and Pacific Ocean. This is supported by the discovery of African skeletal remains in Peru, Ecuador. Although blacks came to South America from East Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, blacks from Exum probably greatly influenced the rise of elaborate monuments and made entirely of stone in Peru and Ecuador, and introduced certain important types of blooms and medical techniques. They also played an important role in the rise of Mochica Empire. Yes, indeed, the Exumites played an important role. They made civilization in South America.